Stand as you are able for the reading of the gospel. The gospel text can be found on page 798 of your pew Bibles if you would like to follow along. The Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew, the 17th chapter, verses 1 through 9. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 dwellings here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud a voice said, "This is my Son, the Beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground and were overcome by fear. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Get up and do not be afraid." And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them, "Tell no one about the vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." This is the gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Please be seated. Grace and peace to you from God our Creator and from Jesus, the Son of God and our Savior. Amen. There are times when we feel closer to God than other times. It's just the way it works. I don't completely understand it, but I know that it's true. I remember the very first time that I really felt like I experienced God in a close and personal kind of way. I was in 4th grade with a fresh summer buzz cut that left me nearly hairless. My mom and dad had loaded me onto the church bus for the 2.5-hour drive to Bible camp. I remember really not knowing anyone that was going up. I remember the nervousness that I felt. I remember wondering what my parents had gotten me into. But I also remember that I discovered something that week. I remember that I loved being with the guys in my cabin. I remember that I got to pick what I would eat for our meals that week. No green beans for me. I remember discovering that I loved canoeing, and I wasn't so big into arts and crafts. I'm still not very good with glue and scissors. And I remember that I discovered for the first time a very personal God, instead of distant or even invisible. At camp, God was obvious and clear. In our worships, in our campfires, in these faith-centered friendships I developed, God felt so close. And I remember that I came home from camp that week committed to that God and to my faith, and I was going to read the Bible every single day. And I did, for a while. And then life got in the way, and I got busy, and things returned to normal. I'd had that experience, and it was great, but now I felt like I'd returned to real life. And so I came to the only logical conclusion that a 4th grader could make. God must live at camp, right? And so I went back again the next summer because I wanted to experience that sense of community and that closeness again. And then the next summer, and then the next. You see, these were transcendent experiences that I'd had at camp. They were experiences that were of God. They were experiences that seemed to exist outside of the normal limitations of the rest of my life. And there were other times that I've experienced this sense of transcendence, this sense of closeness with God. I feel that way often at the end of the day in the Boundary Waters when I'm sitting by the campfire near the lake. I felt that way at West Haven Children's Home in Jamaica when I hear the laughter of the children who live there. I've experienced this closeness on retreats or at youth gatherings or on mission trips. But then there are days when life feels normal And normal means that God feels kind of distant again. You see, while God is a constant, our relationship with God varies. We move closer, we move farther. Sometimes it feels like there is a curtain that separates us from God. And sometimes that curtain can feel so thin, like we can almost see through it. But often it feels thick and heavy, and God can seem hidden from us. Our gospel text for today is a story of transcendence. The curtain in our story feels so thin, almost non-existent. Just to set the scene, Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up a mountain, and there he is transfigured. That is, his appearance is literally changed right in front of them, dazzling white, so that while they recognize their Lord, they also perceive his heavenly glory in a way they had never experienced before. And then Jesus is joined by Moses and Elijah, symbolic of the law and the prophets. Now, it has been, when you think about it, an emotionally charged time. The disciples were following Jesus, but they didn't really understand the importance of what he was saying. And they had been squabbling amongst themselves. The disciples had to be confused by what Jesus was saying and uncertain about the future. And now, dazzled, perplexed, but also excited to be at this place and time and to witness this event, the disciples offer to make dwelling places for Jesus and Moses and Elijah. This is amazing, they say. Can't we just stay here? Now, in all honesty, the whole transfiguration event can be a little hard to interpret. It's this critical moment, this time when Jesus, revealed in glory as the Messiah, is about to turn and begin his journey towards Jerusalem. He will turn towards the cross. He's beginning the journey that will culminate in his death. And in this moment, words are spoken that bring wisdom. Dr. David Lose of the Lutheran Seminary in Philadelphia identifies 3 critical phrases that are spoken out loud during the Transfiguration. The first is God's voice speaking, and the second and third are the words of Jesus. And if ever there were 3 words of instruction, command, and promise that I need to hear right now, well, these are probably them. You can find them in verses 5 and 7 if you'd like. The 3 phrases are these: listen to him, be raised up, and do not be afraid. Listen to him, be raised up, and do not be afraid. Think about it. Right now, the world we live in is filled with a variety of confusing and contradictory events. From congressional hearings to rallies to protests to riots, we hear divisive rhetoric from all political sides. Our nation and our world is experiencing increased tension, and we have an unclear picture of the future. Some dread what is happening. Some find it exciting. All of us, I believe, sense the importance of this moment in our history as our nation wrestles with questions. What are our national values? What is our identity? And amid all of this, I find myself drawn back to these 3 words of instruction, command, and promise. First, the instruction. Listen to him. I believe that in the days in which we live, we need more than ever to come to church and to try and to hear what God is saying to us. And while we may not always agree on what we hear, that's the challenge of living in community, we can agree that the best way to understand God is to look to Jesus and to listen to him, to pay attention to what Jesus says and does, to whom he reaches out, to those he gives attention and help. Yes, we may not all agree, But if we all keep trying to listen to Jesus together and trust that those who disagree with us are doing the same, we will get closer to what God intends for us. Second, the command, get up. Except it's not just get up. The Greek verb that Matthew uses here is the same one that the angels declare to the woman at the empty tomb when they say, "He is not here, he has been raised." So really what Jesus is saying is, be raised up, or even be resurrected. What does it mean to hear Jesus call us to get up, be raised, even resurrected in these confusing days? Well, remember first that God doesn't give commands without also giving us the ability to fulfill those commands. So we might hear in Jesus' words a call to action, but that call also gives us the energy and the will to act, to make a difference, to be raised up and made new by God's grace, and to be about the works of mercy and compassion. Third, the promise, do not be afraid. These words sit at the center of the gospel, words perhaps never more needed than now. We all experience different kinds of fears. We can be nervous about world events or about terrorism, about our jobs, about the economy, about the welfare of our kids, about our health. The list can go on and on. Fear is a common fabric, is a part of the common fabric of our lives, even though it manifests itself differently for each of us. And to all these different fears, the gospel reply is the same. Because God is the God of the past, present, and future, we need not fear. We need not fear. We may not know what the future holds, but we know who holds the future. Now, this is not the same as saying that we'll have no problems or that we'll avoid all harm and hardship, but rather it's recognizing that when we trust God for our individual and communal good, and we believe that God is with us always, we need not fear. Nor is this to make fear the mark of a lack of faith. We all grow afraid at times, but rather it's to recognize that God did not create us for death, but for resurrection. And so God does not want us to be afraid, but to move forward, even and especially in uncertain times, with courage and with confidence. Listen, be raised up, do not be afraid. It's important to remember these words are heard as Jesus begins his journey from that transcendent moment on the mountaintop back down into the realities of the world and to the cross. There, he will be tried and condemned and crucified. For Jesus, for us, this is a transcendent time. It is a time when the presence of God, whether we recognize it or not, is close. God's love is right there, offered to us freely and within our reach. The curtain is not thick and heavy, nor is it even thin. The curtain is torn because of Jesus' love, and he is right here with us. And this love reminds us that our transfiguration story today does not end with the crucifixion. It continues with the promise that God raised the one from the dead so that all of us might have hope that there is more to this life than we can see, that God will be with us every step of the way, and that love and life are always stronger than hate and death. Listen to God. Be raised up, and do not be afraid. Listen to God. Be raised up, and do not be afraid. Thanks be to God.